Okay, so let's talk about what happened after the big one. You think the end of World War II would mean peace, right? Well, not exactly. Instead, from the rubble of the world's most devastating war, a completely new global order was born. We're going to dive into how the end of that war didn't just stop the fighting, it redrew the entire map of global power for the next 50 years.
So, the war is over. Why on earth does a new global conflict begin almost immediately? Well, that's the big question. Because the end of World War II didn't bring this big, lasting peace everyone hoped for. Instead, it kicked off two massive global shifts. You have the big ideological showdown, the Cold War, and at the same time, the old colonial empires are just collapsing. And what we're going to see is that these two things, which might seem totally separate, were actually tangled up together in a huge way.
All right, so to really get what came next, we have to first get a picture of the world right at that moment. And honestly, the world was just broken, utterly exhausted and in ruins after years and years of brutal war. And get this, even the countries that won, like Great Britain and France, were totally shattered. I mean, they were economically wrecked, their factories were rubble, their bank accounts were empty, and their people were just done. This created this huge power vacuum on the world stage. And you know what happens with a vacuum, right? Something has to rush in and fill it. So, who filled that vacuum? Well, two new heavyweights stepped onto the scene: the United States and the Soviet Union. They came out of the war as the world's brand new superpowers, and they were ready to shape the world in their own image. What's fascinating is how these two got so powerful, because their stories were completely different. On one hand, you have the US. Its homeland was never attacked, and the war actually acted like a massive economic shot in the arm. It totally pulled them out of the Great Depression. Then you have the Soviet Union. They suffered absolutely unbelievable devastation. I mean, millions dead, cities flattened. But through sheer force of will and state-controlled industry, they had become an industrial giant with a ton of natural resources. And the U.S. didn't waste any time flexing that economic muscle. They rolled out something called the Marshall Plan. And look at that number, $13 billion. That's what they pumped into rebuilding Western Europe. Now, this wasn't just them being nice, it was super strategic. The thinking was, if we help rebuild these economies, they'll become our trading partners, they'll be stable, and they'll be a lot less likely to fall for the promises of communism. It was basically building a firewall against the Soviets.
But it wasn't just about money. Oh no, a brand new, absolutely terrifying technology had just entered the scene, and it was about to change all the rules.
So in 1945, the US drops the atomic bomb, and suddenly they have the ultimate trump card. For a very brief moment, they were the only ones with this incredible, world-ending power. But that monopoly, it lasted for all of 4 years. By 1949, boom, the Soviets test their own bomb. And just like that, the nuclear arms race was on, and this would become the defining feature of the Cold War. And this is where we get this absolutely insane but weirdly logical idea called mutually assured destruction, or MAD for short. It's a pretty chilling thought, right? The only thing that kept the Cold War from becoming a hot nuclear war was the simple fact that if one side launched its nukes, the other side would launch theirs right back, and everybody would be completely wiped out. No winners, just annihilation. It created this incredibly tense, high-stakes staring contest that lasted for decades. Okay, so while all this is going on, this big standoff between the superpowers, something else huge is happening in the background. The old European empires, the ones that had dominated the globe for centuries, yeah, their time was up, and it was all coming to a head fast. You see, this idea had been bubbling up for a while, especially since World War I. The idea of self-determination. Basically, that people should have the right to govern themselves. And this idea was like wildfire, spreading across the colonies and giving millions of people hope for a future without foreign rulers. The big irony, of course, was that the empires promoting this idea for others weren't exactly rushing to apply it to their own colonies. I mean, look at the mandate system that was set up after World War I. On paper, it was supposed to help former colonies get ready for independence. But what really happened? It pretty much just swapped one colonial boss for another, with the winning countries taking over the losers' territories. People saw right through it. It was basically colonialism with a new name, and it just made people fight even harder for real freedom. So after World War II, everything changes. The old empires are broke, they're exhausted, and they just don't have the money or the will to keep fighting independence movements all over the world. So their empires started to crumble. And look at this. Over 80 new countries popped up on the map. The entire political face of the planet was redrawn in just a couple of decades. And this right here, this is where our two big stories, the Cold War and the end of empires, smash right into each other.
Because these new nations, they weren't just left alone to figure things out. Nope. For the US and the USSR, they were like new squares on a global chessboard. Both superpowers jumped in, pouring in money, weapons, and their own ideologies, trying to win these new countries over to their side. And both of them tried to paint themselves as the real friend of the newly independent world, all to get a leg up in their own rivalry. So let's pull all this together. What's the big takeaway here? The end of World War II wasn't just the end of a war. It was the end of an entire world order. It shattered the old system and built the one that many of us grew up in, totally changing the rules of global power.
So let's just walk through it one more time. Step 1, World War II completely wrecks the old European powers. Step 2, the US and the USSR swoop in to fill that power vacuum, becoming the new superpowers. Step 3, the old empires, now too weak to hold on, fall apart, and dozens of new countries are born. And finally, step 4, these new nations become the new stage for the Cold War rivalry. It's this chain reaction, really, that set up the entire power dynamic for the rest of the 20th century.
And, understanding all this, how money and technology built the superpowers of the past, it really gives us a great way to look at the world we live in right now. Which leaves us with a really big question to think about. Today, power isn't just about armies and nukes, is it? It's about data, about technology, about who controls the global supply chain. So, who are the real superpowers of the 21st century, and what will their version of a Cold War look like?